The Paul Leslie Interviews.
I understand that you've been doing a radio show with some very interesting people.
I have, and you are one of them now. And it's funny because...
Well, that remains to be seen. I'll be the judge of that.
You know, it's funny because the screen that popped up, it has you listed as unnamed. And I thought that was funny, Radio Unnameable.
The name was not accidental. There's a book by Samuel Beckett, who I was reading at the time, called The Unnamable. It's another name for that which is beyond all understanding, or maybe hell, another name for hell. There were people who suggested different names for the show. I mean, I had a feeling that without a name, people wouldn't remember to tune in the next night. In those days, it was considered bad form to call your program after your own name, so it became The Unnameable.
Well, I want to kind of go back a little bit. What was life like growing up?
I lived in Brooklyn. I mean, I feel like I'm still growing up, so maybe I shouldn't answer the question in the usual way. But I think what you meant is, what was my childhood like? We lived across the street from the school, and they used to say, you have to go to the corner and cross at the corner. And I knew that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, which meant I wanted to break rules from the moment I started going to school. Then that was the beginning. I heard wire recordings, and I thought they were somehow fascinating. I wanted to be in plays and be an actor when I was a kid. That had something to do with it. My pals with kids who were sort of similar. One of my earliest memories is suddenly my grandmother said that she had to go to Florida. Now, she was a very tough woman. When she said, I have to go to Florida, it was necessary to take her there. And my uncle and 2 or 3 other members of the family and my 3-year-old self crowded into this car. And so intent was he on getting there that he wouldn't stop for my toilet training.
Oh, my.
And so there was a little potty that they had for me in the car. And I remember them throwing the contents out the front window and having them splash into the back.
Oh, my.
But there was like, everything was kind of hilariously funny to everybody in the car. There was a lot of organized intention, it seemed. That's the earliest thing I remember. Oh, yeah, I also remember sitting in my high chair while my father was studying and watching movies. My father had a movie projector. While he studied, the Mickey Mouse and Popeye films were my babysitter. I would watch them. And then at the end of the reel, rather than rewinding them and playing them again, he would play them backwards. So you see people falling out of the water, and I don't know, something must have happened in my brain around that time when I discovered that backwards is sometimes as interesting as forwards.
What about early memories of the radio?
Did you ever see a Tinker Toy set?
Indeed.
You have?
Yes.
The little hubs that you can stick other dowels in and sort of manufacture structures.
Right. I've seen them.
Yeah, and, well, I had one of those, and I made it look like a radio antenna and a microphone, and I used to pretend that I was on the radio with my mock-up radio made out of a Tinker Toy set. When I was in high school, they had a program of taking people from English classes to be on plays that were broadcast from on WNYE, the All City Radio Workshop.
What about the first time you were heard on the radio? Can you remember the first time you spoke into a microphone or your voice was heard over the radio airwaves?
I have a few different flashes of one time I was in the audience at some New York Times program for children in high school, and had asked some sort of a question. I remember when I was at Delphi College, they had a radio workshop. We did a couple of radio plays. One of them was Christopher Fry's Boy with a Cart, about St. Cuthman, who carried his mother on his back across, I think, Wales, building churches. Oh, yeah, and at Delphi College, they said when I was 15 years old, I had some sort of summer scholarship. Some guy said, "This is the control room. This is how you turn the microphone on. This is how you turn the turntable on. Do something if you want to. You can touch anything." And he came back an hour later, and I listened to the tape, and I introed a record. I even know what it was.
What is it you like about being on the radio?
Well, there's something very important in my mind, anyway, about spreading the news. Something that is a great piece of music or a little glimpse of the reality behind the surface. I mean, think of your friends and think of what it is that makes you feel. Mine anyway, were people who were with me on exploratory journeys into different subjects that I didn't know anything about. And at a certain point in my life, it was how to throw a softball. And at other points in my life, it was how to have girls like me and not be scared of them. Later on, it may have been, I don't know, how to live realistically in imaginary circumstances. It might have been how to give expression to something that I was moved by. Where to find this record that I had heard existed of Bertolt Brecht singing, where, that I can think of moments like that. And then most of the people who I wanted to spend time with were people who I met from working on projects. Something wonderful about a bunch of people who are not on anybody's clock, but are trying to make something good happen. Whether it's, one of the things that I had to do that was sort of related to Woodstock, the town of Woodstock. Marguerite Culp was the editor of the Woodstock Times. Did you know her?
I do not know.
she had developed a relationship with someone who was in prison, who had written her, and she'd gone to see him. And she thought he had an interesting mind, and we were participated in a campaign to secure amnesty for him. It ended in amnesty being given for the first time in New York State. And Gary was a free man for a while. The people who have put their minds at risk to tell us something about the other realities are always kind of fascinating to me. I knew a guy who had been a station manager at WBAI. He was in his 70s, and he lived near the Bowery, and with what everyone said was not a sexual interest, his name was Mel Most. He would, tell a prostitute that he would pay her to just get off the street for an hour or maybe a night. Then she could go back and do whatever she wanted and try to use a condom. He actually got a couple of the ladies to go to school. He was just like a kind of an independent anarchist trying to make the world a place where he didn't have to suffer so much, seeing these young ladies inevitably being used and abused. He came from a great anarchist tradition. His father had some kind of relationship with Emma Goldman. And what was the question?
Well, you answered it. I asked you what it was that you liked about the radio, and you expressed a lot about the importance of communicating from a personal level.
Right. When I turn on my tap and brown water comes out, it's just so much brown water even when you report it. But if 3 or 4 people do it, or if a whole block of people know that they can complain about it, sometimes the city will do something that will, make life a little bit easier for people. Information is the lifeblood of, like, our anticipatory democracy. We anticipate having democracy, but we surely don't have it.
Of the people you've spoken to, and I mean, it's been a lot of people throughout the years, can you think of one that has been the most interesting to talk to?
Gee, one person. You today. No, I mean, that's a very, very, I can think of people who I loved because they were so bizarre. I can think of people who I love because they made me laugh, or they had a kind of an insight into the way things were. That is, I think it's William Burroughs who says, and Leonard Cohen quotes him, and so does Jeffrey Lewis. It's the light. The crack is where the light shines through. When someone is suffering and they have someone to tell it to, even if it's only one person, it's helpful. Or when someone is in the air, the night, the music, and they share that, that's great. When someone says, I think this new pipeline that's going to be shoved down our throats like a feeding tube. It's good that there are people who listen and know where they can. Here's about that. I don't know whether it'll, in that case, stop the pipeline, but at least there is an opposition to it that is very informed, much more informed than the people who are voting for it.
What is the best sound in the world?
The best sound in the world. Someone who loves you whispering in your ear.
What were the hardest times in radio for you, and how did you hang on?
Well, the hardest times were when I was fired from basically an operation that I had created. I mean, that's a hyperbole. That's not really true. But I had a pretty fair influence on the success of this radio station. And suddenly, according to some people, I was having too much fun. I was saying things that were, in some people's minds, dangerous for the license of the station. But whatever the reason, probably had as much to do with my trying to, be on the air 4 or 5 nights a week and have a life outside of my life on the air. But anyway, it happened. And during the time that I was off WBAI, I did programs on WFMU, which is another of those wonderful islands of freedom and cracked surfaces that I was talking about before. That was one of the things that I did. And I listened to good music, and I did a couple of plays. I did some work with the Living Theater, and a guy named Larry Lunan, who was a very, very good theatrical director. And I did a commercial. I wrote the commercial with John Kalish for the Broadway show of Doonesbury. I had a chance to spend some time with Jock Levy, who wrote a bunch of songs with Dylan and was a great theatrical director. He was also a psychiatrist, I believe. Didn't surprise me when I heard it. I used to say, my life is hanging on by a Band-Aid. But what a Band-Aid. Some band. There's a blues line. I don't know. I've had my fun. I have had a lot of fun. I've known some very high performing and thinking, exciting, funny people. I still have a few projects that I want to try to accomplish.
What are those projects? Tell us about that.
Well, right now I'm trying to do a radio show from my home. It's also on the net, and it's on a couple of stations in different parts of the country. I don't have any children, but it might be nice to adopt the highway. There are things that I might like to try to do if I had a little money. I still read the online New York Times every day and try to stay in touch with people I love.
Who do you respect in radio? Are there people you admire that are still doing it?
Well, I have to hark back to the days when radio was where I got most of my information. You know, I remember Studs Terkel, Bob and Ray, Henry Morgan, Robert Benchley. Today, there are a lot of great haircuts on television, but very few people are given the chances that Bill Maher is. It'd be great to see someone like Krasner, you know, leading a talk show. That would be wonderful.
You've had a lot of musical guests throughout the years. Who has been the most enjoyable?
My mother used to say, comparisons are odious. How can you compare one artist to another? Only by forgetting that they're artists. They each have their individual vision. I certainly like to listen to Dylan. I like to listen to good poetry. I used to I was the engineer for Judy Collins a couple of times when she did a folk music program on BAI. I used to love that. I like Rosalie Sorrell's voice, the Beatles, the blues. Jeffrey Lewis is really wonderful. The Fugs, the Holy Modal Rounders. Great music scene in New York City. People send me shows that take place at various clubs on video. It's thrilling to spend your life in the middle of this ferment. Even on Staten Island, there's a great cultural center. I say even on Staten Island. Staten Island was where Garibaldi came when he had to leave Italy. Staten Island was where the Catholic Worker had its summer camp. Dorothy Day lived and died on Staten Island.
You mentioned just a moment ago Bob Dylan. Can you tell us about the first time you met Bob Dylan?
Sure. I double dated with him. I guess I did know that he was a folk singer. Well, wait a minute. No, that's a false memory. Bob Dylan was performing, and somebody took me to see him perform. That was when I first saw him. But I had friends who knew him, and his girlfriend Suze had a sister named Carla, and I met Dylan. I think we played poker once or twice, went driving a few times. I took him to the airport once, but when I had him on the radio, and it wasn't easy to get him to come up and be on the radio, he was very cagey. But when he finally did come up, it was wonderful. Well, he took telephone calls, and he assumed other characters, pretending to be a member of an improvisational theater group. There was a kind of a brilliance about him, and incredible concentration. I introduced him to my brother. We went up to visit my brother, who was sick, living in my parents' house. My brother had one of those jigsaw puzzles that couple of thousand pieces. They look alike, and there's a lot of sky, and my brother had, after about 3 weeks, managed to put like, a tenth of it together. And Dylan said, "Oh, that's interesting, but let's see." And then he began to organize the pieces that were lying around on the table. This one had a little curve here. This one had a little curve here too, and like all of the possibilities to fit next to. I mean, he organized the task in a way that made it seem possible. Said, "I can't imagine how you can do that, Bob. That's really wonderful." I said, "The only thing I can think of that's tougher than that is to turn it over and do the puzzle just on the unprinted cardboard." And he said, "Oh, yeah? I bet you could do that, too." And I think he probably could have. Another story, he had this relationship with Albert Grossman for years and years. Grossman guided his career to a large extent, protected him when necessary, and advocated for him. And then they came to a time in their relationship when they were having some trouble, and then they had a lot of trouble, and they began to make a lot of money. It began to be contentious, and they went to lawyers' offices, and they sat around, and they argued, and they argued, and they argued, and they couldn't come to an agreement. And Dylan got up and just walked out of the room, and Grossman chased him out of the room and said, Bobby, wait a minute, let's flip a coin." And Dylan said, "All right." And that's how they decided it. I don't know, it's just an odd couple of moments.
What do you think is the most important thing in the world?
Mercy, compassion.
Why do you say that?
Empathy. Because that's what unites us with others. We're very touched when, or at least I am, when I hear that when they've discovered ancient human remains in the rift in the Olduvai Gorge that indicate that someone had a terrible injury, a broken spine, and yet it was an old wound, and they lived a long life afterwards. They only could have lived if other humans had taken care of them. So, I mean, it's like part of our species for all of, even unrecorded history. I don't know, I think dancing is important. I think laughter is very important. It fills your brain with oxygen. It's our only hope.
When somebody is listening to Radio Unnameable, your show, what do you hope that people get from the experience of listening?
Allen Ginsberg said something about poet's job is to ease the pain of living. So if that doesn't sound too pretentious, it's what I hope they get. And I hope at least there's that level that makes them think this is a worthwhile experience. That was a good song. If I don't like this song, there's going to be one that I will like coming up soon. I used to love to take telephone calls. It's a little hard to do now after one of the things that I would like some additional cash for is to put in a few more phone lines. so that I could put two people on who don't know each other on the air at the same time and have them talk to each other. That was something that I thought was very important to do at one point.
What is the best thing about being Bob Fass?
I get to talk to people like you.
For anyone who's listening, wherever they are, whenever they hear this, if you could say one thing to those people, what would you say?
Be good to yourself.
Be good to yourself. My last question. Who is Bob Fass?
I'll let you know if I ever run into him.
Thank you very much for this time. Thank you for sharing.
Well, I know that you called me because you saw the Radio Unnameable movie. And I just want to say that that movie was the work not of me, but of Paul Lovelace and Jessica Wolfson, who are brilliant. They condensed 50 years into 87 minutes, and they did a masterful job.
It was a very enjoyable film.
Well, thank you. Thank you. They're great artists. Thank you very much. I enjoyed talking to you. I got a glimpse of what your program must be like. I'm going to try to listen